Hello, so in this video I want to just address how do you know what quadrant the sum or difference of two angles is. So there are some problems that give you two angles separately and tell you what each quadrant each angle is in, but they don't, you have to figure out, okay, now that I have to add or subtract these angles and do things to them, in what quadrant is this new angle that ends up being the sum or difference of the two angles that were given, okay? So let me just go through a few problems, and by the way, it kind of really doesn't matter what the original quadrant of each individual angle was in. It really doesn't matter. What matters is what you end up finding out for the ratio, you know, the trig ratio, the sine, cosine, tangent, that kind of thing, of the sum or difference of the angles. That's what matters. All right, so here's an example. Suppose, and by the way, in this, I am not going to go through all the calculations. I've got some videos on that. What happens, I think, is you can get really bogged down in a lot of the calculations and the arithmetic. So what I want to do is just talk about the concept itself, right? So that's why I'm not even going through numbers. So suppose you go through all the rigmarole of finding what the actual ratios are, and you find that the cosine of the sum of two angles, angle S and angle T, when you take the cosine of that sum, you come out with a negative ratio. Like, I'm just going to make something up, like -3/5 or something like that. But it really doesn't matter what the number is. What matters is the sign, whether it's positive or negative. And then you also know about that same sum that the tangent of the sum of S plus T is positive, right? So I'm just kind of telling you here, I'm going to use these symbols, negative with a little circle and positive with the plus sign with a little circle. So you want to know what quadrant is the sum of this angle S plus T. All right, so just have to recall that cosine, right, is the x coordinate. Sine is the what? Y coordinate, right? And tangent is the ratio of y over x. So you kind of need to know that. And I'm assuming we're on a unit circle, so it's x over r, but r is 1, that kind of thing. All right, so on this one, if they're telling me cosine of the sum of two angles is negative, that means they're really telling me that I know x is what? Negative. And then they're telling me tangent of the same sum of two angles is positive. So I know that tangent is y over x, and so I know that y over x is positive, right? So what I can do now is substitute this negative in for the x, and I know that y over some negative number ends up being a positive number. So you got to say to yourself, well, okay, for that ratio to end up being positive, but this denominator is negative, what must y be? Well, y would have to be what? Negative, right? So therefore, I know y must be negative. And now what I know is both x and y are negative. So if you look at your quadrants, right, and you have here, for x to be negative, so I'm going this way, and y to be negative, I'm going this way, I must be in here, quadrant 3. Okay? Next example. Suppose sine of the sum of S and T, the angles S and T, is negative. So what does that tell you? I know that sine is y, so I know that y, the y coordinate, is negative. And then tangent of the same sum of two angles is negative. So I know that the ratio of y over x is negative. So now I can plug in y, which is negative, here for the numerator. So I have a negative over some x coordinate is negative. So for this ratio to be negative, x has to be what? Positive, right? So I know that x must be positive. So now when I look at the quadrants, right? X is positive, so I'm going this way, and then y is negative, so I'm going this way. So I must be in here, quadrant 4. Okay? All right, a couple more examples just to really drive this home. Suppose I have here cosine of the sum of two angles S plus T is negative, and tangent of the sum of two angles is negative. So what quadrant is that sum going to be in? So cosine is negative, that means the x coordinate is negative. And then the tangent is the ratio y over x is negative. So now I can put in negative in for x. So I have this, right? So for this ratio to be negative, but one of the values here, the denominator is negative, that means the numerator must be what? Positive, right? So now I say, oh, okay. X is negative, so I'm going this way. Y is positive, I'm going that way. So I'm in here. That's quadrant what? 2, right? All right, and last one. You can pause. You can, redo these, pause it, that kind of thing. But pause. Go ahead and work with this one. So here, sine is positive. That means the y coordinate is positive. And then the tangent, which is y over x, the ratio, is positive. So if the y is positive over some x, and you get a positive ratio, that means the x also has to be what? Positive. So here I have x is positive, y is also positive. I'm in here, quadrant 1. Okay? So that's how you can tell what quadrant, the sum or difference. And again, it doesn't even matter if this had been the difference. What I'm looking at is what? The signs, right? And working with the definition of the ratios. All right, thanks so much for listening.